Welcome to our first event of 2024, One Person Can Make a Difference, with the remarkable Jeanne Smith. Building on the success of our December 10th Pittsburgh premiere of Irene's Vow, this event serves as a powerful follow-up, delving into the extraordinary legacy left by Jeanne's mother, Irene Guy Opdyke. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I am Ellen Resnick, the Educational Programs and Outreach Manager at Classrooms Without Borders. Classrooms Without Borders stands as a leading provider of experiential professional development for teachers, educational leaders, and lifelong learners. Whether through unique travel experiences or virtual learning opportunities, CWB enriches the educational journey with academic literature, relevant content, and resources. Our reach extends to over 158 schools in Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Florida, and beyond. As we are now celebrating 13 years of engaging programming, CWB remains committed to fostering inclusivity and social justice in education. Over the past 3 years, we've hosted an impressive 491 programs, welcoming nearly 78,000 participants from 58 countries and 46 of the United States. This year, 2024, holds exciting prospects with over 20 events planned for January and February and an impressive 725 registrants to date. We believe in the power of education to transform communities, and your support is integral to making this vision a reality. For those of you that are new to our virtual events, I encourage you to explore the diverse topics we cover, from Jewish history and Israel to the Holocaust, genocide, and issues of hate. If you wish to contribute to support our mission, a donation link will be shared in the chat shortly. We extend our heartfelt thank you to each of you for your support and invite you to champion our outreach, partnering with us as we continue to make a positive impact through education. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's event and speaker, as Jeanne shares her gripping mother's story of resistance, defiance, and against the SS and Nazis, and the unwavering commitment to saving lives during the Holocaust. We are reminded that our smallest actions can make a monumental impact. Jeanne's narrative is not just about a historical account. It is a testament to the enduring power of love and the belief that each individual has the potential to shape a better world. Through her mother's eyes, Jeanne unfolds a story that transcends time and speaks directly to the challenges of our present and the choices we make every day. Jeanne Smith is a recipient of the 2015 Civil Rights Award and an honorary member of the Jewish Federation of North America. She brings a unique perspective to the horrors of the Holocaust and the enduring human spirit. Her words echo the truth that one person can and does make a difference. Join us in this exploration of history, courage, and the impact of individual choices. Together, let's draw inspiration from Jeanne's journey and embrace the conviction that indeed one person can make a difference in this world. Please send any questions you have directly to me, Ellen Resnick, via the chat. We will do our best to answer them all. And with that, now, Jeanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellen. That was such a nice introduction. I sure appreciate it. Well, for any of you that have seen the movie, you're going to hear a lot of before and a lot of after, which is equally important. So it's an honor to get to share with you. And your organization sounds amazing. So it's my goal to check it out a little bit more and maybe dig my feet in and get involved. My mother was born Irene Guy. She was the oldest of 5 beautiful sisters, she used to say. If you knew who Zsa Gabor is, kind of keep that accent in mind, because that's what she sounded like, and actually who she looked like quite a bit went on, at least the mother that I knew. My mom was born in Poland. Her father was an architect. Her mom was a homemaker. But my mom's dream was to become a nurse. And so her parents sent her off to nursing school just as soon as she graduated high school. She'd never even been away from home by herself. And so it was exciting and a bit nerve-wracking. She'd only been to school a few days, a week, maybe 2 weeks, when one morning she got up extra early. She was going to go to the cafeteria and study for a test. But when she walked outside, the sun that was starting to come out was completely covered because there was airplanes flying overhead, dropping bombs everywhere. Without any warning, Hitler had invaded Poland. It was September 1st, 1939. Mom stood there kind of shell-shocked until somebody came up, grabbed her, threw her down on the ground and said, "You're going to get yourself killed." It was a matter of hours before the school and the hospital that was next door kind of regrouped to try and get people assembled so they could take care of the neighborhood that was wounded and injured from the attacks. Mom did the best she could with her 2 weeks of nursing school. But it was 16 days later that Stalin from the Soviet Union also invaded Poland from the other side. And just like that, her whole country was gone. They did what they could with a school that was blown apart. Other wells were gone. The medicine ran out. They had no supplies. But one afternoon, Mom said there was a group of people who came by and they were looking for volunteers, people who would join up and fight the enemies that had taken over their country. A few of the neighboring people joined up, and Mom was one of them. She got on a truck and headed out of town until they came to the Ukrainian woods, where they left the truck and walked into the woods so they could set up camp. They were a ragtag bunch, and what they were doing was illegal, so they had to be away from everybody. They dug holes in the forest floor to live in and covered themselves with tarps and blankets. They had very little food, very little ammunition. And it didn't take very long to find out that the Polish army that they hoped would be able to group and fight was already conquered before they ever began. And depression set into the group of people out in the forest. Mom said every morning she would wake up to see those who had taken their lives in the middle of the night out of desperation. And because of her medical experience, it was her job to clean the bodies before they were buried. A few weeks later, their food source was just about gone. And so they decided they had to go into town to get some more supplies. And so a small group was chosen, and my mom was one of those in the group. She said they had to walk through the forest till they got to the edge of town. And when they got to the road that led to town, the older people in the group told the 17-year-old Irene, just stay back and watch and just hold their spot. So she stood there all by herself, and she said at the edge of town, she could smell a bakery, hot, fresh cinnamon rolls. And you know, when you're starving, I can't imagine how good that smell was. And it totally captivated her, so much so that she didn't hear or see a truck full of Russian soldiers coming her way. But they saw her. They jumped out and chased her, and she ran as fast as she could. But they caught her and beat her, ripped her clothes off, gang raped her, and left her for dead in the snow. I don't know how long she laid there, but eventually another truck of Soviet soldiers came by and they saw her body lying there, and they stopped and saw that she was still alive, threw her in the back of their truck and dropped her off at a Soviet hospital, where she stayed for weeks because her injuries were so severe. She was told that the rapes made it so that she'd never be able to have children. Finally, when she was strong enough, she was able to get out of bed, but she wasn't free to leave. She became a forced laborer there and put to work in the hospital. But that too was a dangerous place, and I don't have time to get into that, but Mom knew that she couldn't stay there very long without getting into real trouble. And so one afternoon she noticed an opening in the wooden slat fence behind the hospital. And she got outside and she fit through that little crack in the fence, and she ran as fast as she could. She wasn't even sure where she was, but she hoped maybe a town or two away. She had an aunt that lived in that direction. And so this time, very carefully, she made her way through the streets. But one evening, she said she came to a town that was just strange. She said it was completely empty. The streets were empty. Doors to buildings and houses were left open, some windows broken, nobody in sight. Because it was late and she was tired, she found what looked like an apartment building and went upstairs and fell asleep on a second-story floor. But in the morning, she woke up to shouts and screams down in the street. And so she went to a window and she looked down, and she saw a sight no one was meant to see. Our history books refer to it as a death march. But what Mom saw was a mass of people being herded down the street like they were cattle. She said looking at this group of people would be like if the police came to your neighborhood and took every single person out of every home. There was a cross section of people from elderly all the way down to newborns and families of all sizes. They were being forced down the street by German soldiers waving guns and shouting at them. Mom noticed one young German soldier go up to a young mother holding a child, and he was screaming at her. The woman didn't understand German, but my mother did. He was saying she wasn't walking fast enough, and then with one movement of his hand, he grabbed that child, threw it in the air, and shot it like it was a bird, and then shot the mother. She watched as the group continued to walk down the street of the town, and she ran downstairs and she followed at a distance. At the edge of town, there was a large field, and someone had dug a great big pit in the middle of that field. The Jews were forced to stand around the edge of that pit. Mom found a fence and she hid behind it and watched. She watched as the parents covered their children's eyes with their hands, and she watched as they were shot and fell into the pit and quickly buried. She said the ground moved for a long time because people were buried alive. And my mom was raised Catholic, and she had a really simple childlike faith, but she said watching this horrific sight, she said, I literally screamed at God, how could you do this? I don't understand why. She was so upset that she screamed, I don't even believe you that you're there. And then she just kept walking, more lost than ever. But she said with each step she took, she said there was one thought that settled into her heart and into her mind, and it was this, that God gives us free will to be good or bad, to help and heal, or to hurt and harm. And it's up to us to decide what we'll do. And she said right then and there, she made a promise, a vow, that if there was ever anything she could do to help, she would. Well, she kept walking and finally got to a town that she recognized, a town that she knew her aunt lived in. And walking down the street, she eventually made her way to her aunt's house. And just as she turned the corner, the front door of that house opened up and out came Mom's four sisters. Her whole family had gone there looking for her, and she had a wonderful reunion with them. But it was very short-lived because the Germans came and they took her father away. They wanted him to make factories for the German war front. My grandfather was an architect, but he was able to bring his whole family if he wanted to. But when he learned that where he was going was next to a facility that trained young German soldiers, he decided not to take my mother or the next oldest sister, Janina, because it was too dangerous for those two teenage girls to be close to that. So my mom and her sister and her aunt stayed behind. And the following Sunday, they decided to go to church. And when they were in the church worshiping, the doors burst open and the German army came in and forced everybody up and out of the church, pulling them by their hair, kicking at them. When they got outside, Mom did her best to try and hold on to her sister and her aunt, but they were separated and everybody was shoved on trucks unless you were very, very old or very, very young. My mom's truck took her off to the town of Tarnopol without her sister and her aunt. When she got to Tarnopol, she was forced to work in a munitions factory making ammunition for the German war front. The conditions were horrible. It was freezing cold. There was barely enough to eat, and Mom became very, very sick. And one day, a high-ranking German officer, a major, he came by to make sure the production was being kept up. And when he walked by my mom's section, she ended up fainting right at his feet. When she woke up, she was in the office with this man, terrified that if he thought she couldn't keep up, he'd send her even further away or just have her killed. And so she pleaded with him, please, sir, I haven't been well, but I'm strong and I can do this job if you just give me one more chance. He was impressed that she could speak German and that she looked very dramatic, blonde hair, blue eyes. And he asked her, "Are you a German girl?" And she answered truthfully, "No, I'm Polish." He said, "I like that you're honest, but it's apparent you can't keep up here. You'll come with me. I'll give you another job." So he took her to the camp that he was in charge of. It wasn't a concentration camp. It was a camp that housed German soldiers and some officers and secretaries. And Mom's job would be serving meals in the diner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And she was given one other job, and that was to oversee the laundry room. She was told that the laundry workers were not doing a good job, and it was up to her to improve on that. And when she went into the laundry room, she found out why they weren't doing a good job. They were all skilled, educated people. One was a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an accountant, a nurse. People with beautiful homes and families, and everything they had been taken from them. And now they were forced to live in the ghetto next door and take care of their captives' clothes. Mom and them became very, very good friends. And after a little bit, even more than friends, informants, because when Mom would serve meals in the diner, she could overhear conversations with the officers, especially if the Gestapo, the SS, Nazis were there. She was just a girl, so they didn't censor what they said. I don't know if they thought she was too dumb, but they talked freely about the plans of what they would be doing, especially about the Jewish people that were in the area. Mom could get that information, give it to her friends in the laundry room. They could spread that information through the ghetto. And because of their networking, hundreds of people were able to leave areas before they were invaded. But one night, the major had at his table one of the heads of the Nazi party. And when Mom went up to serve him, she heard the Nazi tell the major, "Next week, don't plan on having any of your Jews. You're going to have to hire substitute workers." The major argued. He said, "What are you talking about? I've got quotas to fill. How am I going to get my work done without my workers?" And this Nazi said, "I don't care. You hire Poles, Gypsies. I have my orders that by this time next week, there won't be one Jew left alive." And Mom knew that that meant her friends in the laundry room as well. And she had the difficult decision on whether she should tell them that in 1 week, everything that they had, the little that they had, would be taken away. But finally, she decided she had to tell them. And when she did, they pleaded with her, "Irene, help us, hide us, and do something." She said, "I have a little room above the diner with a single cot and a wash basin. I've got no place to hide 12 people. But that night, she got down on her knees and prayed for a miracle. And in the morning, she had one, because the major came to her and he said, "I'm taking a villa at the end of town. I'm going to be doing a lot of entertaining, and you are going to come and be my housekeeper." He made her go look at the villa that day to make sure that everything was all right, find out what it needed. And when Mom went to the villa and walked up to the front steps, she noticed a mezuzah there on the doorpost. It told her a couple of things. One, that a Jewish family had lived there, and could possibly confirm the rumors going around that wealthy Jewish families often had hiding places somewhere in their home. So she had a plan and told her friends about it. They all thought she was absolutely nuts to try and hide them in a German official's home. But that's how it worked out. Mom was able to sneak them out of the laundry room, out of the camp, down the streets of the town, down a coal chute, and into the basement until they were all there. After that, the major decided he would go to see the villa himself, and Mom went with him. And when he walked through it, he said, "Irene, this house is filthy. I want it scrubbed. I want it painted from top to bottom." And he made her arrive the next day with a squad of German soldiers ready to do just that. She started the soldiers upstairs and kept her friends quiet in the basement. When they were finished, she brought the soldiers from the front staircase down, her friends from the back staircase up, hid them in a tiny spot up in the attic until the house was cleaned and painted. Finally, they were finished. she was able to bring them back down into the basement and breathe a sigh of relief. Until the major came in and looked at the house and said, Irene, it looks great. We're going to start entertaining soon. There are going to be a lot of parties, a lot of people. And to help you, I'm going to bring a young orderly who can help you with everything. He can sleep in the basement. She realized that could not happen. And she pleaded with him, please, sir, I have be a nervous wreck having a young soldier, a young man here with me. She had to tell him what had happened to her with the Soviets about the rapes. He said, don't be an idiot. Nothing is going to happen to you in my house. You're perfectly safe. But she pleaded, she begged. He said, Irene, we're going to have parties for 30, 40, 50 people a night. There's not one way that one person can do all that. She said, I was trained by my mother. Please give me just one chance. He agreed to do that. And she breathed a sigh of relief. They did have a lot of parties, but while the major was gone every single day, Mom would open the basement door, let all 12 of her friends come up. The men did all the heavy lifting and the repair work. The women did the cooking, the cleaning, the polishing, and helping her with the cooking. And every day, the major came home to find the house in tip-top shape and ready for entertaining. That's how they got by for almost a year, until one day, 2 of the 12 in the basement came to Mom and said that they were expecting a baby that would cry and give them all away. And the parents felt like they had no other choice. And they gave my mom a list of supplies to go to the pharmacy so that they could terminate the pregnancy. And my mom was Catholic, and that was not something that she thought that she could do. And she pleaded and she begged with them, promising that somehow, some way they would all survive. Took a lot of convincing, but finally they did all decide to just wait. They would either all live together or all die together. Down in the basement, they looked and looked for a hiding place that they hoped that they would be able to find. And sure enough, they did. It was behind a little trap door. There was a piece of wallboard that could be removed. And when it was, if you got down on your hands and knees, there was a tunnel that you could crawl through. And at the end of that tunnel was a small room that sat just underneath the gazebo in the side yard, a room just big enough to hold 12 people. And so they had that in place should they ever have any problems. One afternoon, Mom had to go into town to get some more supplies for another upcoming party. And when she was in the store, she said German soldiers came in and yelled at everybody, "Get outside." She had no idea what was going on, but when she walked out of the store, she realized the whole town was being forced up the street into the center square, and she had no choice but to go along with them. In the middle of the square, when she finally got up there, she immediately saw a set of gallows that had been erected. There was a Polish Catholic family who had been caught hiding a Jewish family. Both families had kids. The Nazi in charge told everybody that this is what happens if you help a Jew. And then he hung the children first in front of the parents, made them watch, and then hung the parents. My mom said she closed her eyes, but even with closed eyes, she could see, because you can hear and you can feel what's going on. And it was that day walking back to the villa that Mom forgot to do what she had done every day before that. You see, when the major would leave the house in the morning, she would walk him out to the house, but she would always lock the inside of the door and put her key inside of it. That way, if he ever came home before he was supposed to, his key wouldn't fit in the door and he'd have to ring the doorbell so she could open it. But that day, because she was so shook up, she forgot to do that. All she could think about is, I can't tell my friends what I've seen. There's nothing they could do about it, and it would just upset them. When she got back into the house, she opened up the basement door and let 3 of the women come up to help her with the evening meal. because of what happened that afternoon, it was much later than normal and she needed to get dinner ready. All she could do was concentrate on just trying to act normal. But as they were standing in the kitchen chatting and cooking, there was a noise at the kitchen door, and they turned and they looked, and there was the major standing there, his eyes bulging, his chin shaking. She turned to her friends and said, "Get down in the basement." And she looked at him. He turned around and he went to his office where the telephone was. And she said, "I had no choice but to run after him." She grabbed a hold of his legs to stop him. He, of course, turned around and screamed at her, "How could you do this in my own home, under my own nose, after all I've done for you? Why?" And she's crying and said, "They're my friends. No one has the right to kill because of race or religion. These people, they've done nothing wrong. Punish me, kill me, but let them go. They're innocent." He screamed, "Turn you in? You think I can march you to the Gestapo? And they're not going to believe that I didn't know I had Jews hiding in my own house." My husband just came home. Sorry.
Sorry.
He picked up the phone and then he sat it down. He said, "I have a solution. I'll keep your secret, but for a price. You have to be mine anytime I ask, and willingly." Mom said that there was no decision to be made. There was too many lives at stake. And she never told her friends in the basement what she had to do. She said their integrity would have never let her make that decision. But they did all survive. And eventually the Soviets, they started pushing the Germans out of Poland, and the whole war front was starting to collapse. And the major came to Mom at one point and said, "I have orders to move my unit. Will you come with me?" She said, I don't know." He said, "The first thing you have to do is get the Jews out." Now, interestingly enough, he never asked if there was more than those 3 women that he saw up in the kitchen. He never asked if there was more. He didn't know that there was men down there, didn't know that there was a total of 12 people down there. But he said, "You need to get the women out first. And then I will come back and we will meet up." When he left, my mom took her friends by threes. She laid them in the bottom of his wagon. She covered them with blankets and shovels and food and rode from the villa out into the forest where the partisans were waiting for her. Back and forth, back and forth. You know what? I forgot one important aspect of this. During the time that they were in the villa before this happened, my mom found out that 2 of the Jewish people were expecting a baby. I told you about that. So, yes, so she rode them back and forth until they were out into the forest. And the very last trip that they took, she decided to stay with them. And 6 days later, that little baby was born. His name was Roman Holler. And my mom said holding baby Roman was her payment in full for everything she'd done. Now, her friends wanted her to continue to stay out there, but she wanted to find her family. It had been almost 5 years. She didn't know if her parents or her 4 sisters were even alive. So she left, and a lot of things happened during this time. But at one point, Mom was captured, this time by the Soviets. They accused her of being head of the partisans. And because she was a mistress of a high-ranking German officer, she was accused of being a spy. And she was put in a concentration camp and tortured, actually, interrogated, woke up in the middle of the night for interrogation. But at one point, my mom found herself alone upstairs next to an open window. She jumped out of that window, hurt herself badly, but was managed to escape and find some of her friends who ended up giving her a false passport, a new name. She became a Jew, Sonia Solferstein, and they smuggled her out of Poland into Germany, into a displaced persons camp, where she was able to disclose to the rabbi there at the camp who she really was. Mom sat in this displaced persons camp for 2 years trying to put her life together. She found out that her mother had died. Her father had been shot by the Germans. She couldn't find out anything about her 4 little sisters and assumed that they had died. As the war was winding down, there was a group of men from the United Nations who came to do interviews of the people in the camp, and there was a American delegate who came to the camp Mom was at, and he ended up interviewing her. He could speak English and French. Mom could speak Polish, German, Russian, and Yiddish by that time. And with an interpreter, she told her story. And afterwards, he said, the United States of America would be honored for you to come. And he gave her the paperwork necessary to come to the States. I love the part when she talked about coming into the United States, in through Ellis Island. She said she stood on the bow of that boat, saw the Statue of Liberty, and said, I put a do not disturb sign over all my memories. I'll never talk about or think about what has happened. My life starts new here. She got off the boat, not speaking a word of English, not knowing a soul, and not having any money, but she could speak Yiddish, and she was in New York, and she made a lot of wonderful Jewish friends who helped her find a job, helped her get an apartment. It took Mom 5 long years, but she became a United States citizen. And to celebrate, she had been saving money from every single paycheck she had so that she could take herself out to a fancy restaurant in Manhattan. She picked the restaurant. She went in one day, all dressed up, surprised that it had so many people at lunchtime, so many people that could afford to eat there. And she was sat at a back table where there was only one other table next to her. And as she was looking at the menu, the maitre d' brought a gentleman in to sit next at the table next to her. And to be polite, he thought he would check with her. He said, pardon me, miss, would you mind if I sat here? And then he looked at her. Irene, he said. He was the UN delegate who'd interviewed her at the displaced persons camp, the very man that had invited her to the United States. Well, he asked her out to dinner that night and the next night, and 6 weeks later, they were married. My parents moved from the East Coast out to the West Coast, and Mom became an interior decorator. With her little Zsa Zsa Gabor voice and her ability to sew, she could sell ice to Eskimos. She was so talented and so well known. And I was born as kind of a miracle. I'll tell you, my mom, she could do anything. But that's how I knew her, as this elegant businesswoman who really took care of our family so well. I never heard any of these stories. True to her word, she'd kept that do not disturb sign up. It wasn't until one evening when I was about 14, 3 of us were sitting at the dinner table, the phone rang, and it was always from my mom. It was always some customer. But this night, it wasn't a customer. It was a young college student who was doing a survey in school, and his topic, the Holocaust never happened. It was just propaganda drummed up by the Jews so we'd feel sorry for them. He wanted to know what she thought. He found out. And so did I. You know, as a 14-year-old, you don't pay attention to your parents on the phone, but even someone as dull as me after a while realizes she's saying some pretty incredible things. And I remember looking at my dad saying, well, what's she talking about? He was the only person in this country who knew her story because he'd interviewed her all those years back. What I do remember is the young man ended up hanging up on my mother. She stood there just holding the receiver with tears streaming down her face and looking at us and saying, all these years that I've kept silent, I've allowed evil and I've allowed the enemy to win. Because when we don't talk about what hate does, history just keeps repeating itself. And she said, I'm willing from now on to go anywhere, to talk to anyone, so that these things never happen again. And that's exactly what she did. You know, when I tell a story to audiences, I usually stop right here and tell people the title of the talk. It's kind of a weird time to tell the title, but it sort of fits. and the title is love. It's such an overused word. I mean, we use it for ice cream. We love this, we love our clothes, our shoes, our dog, whatever. But the kind of love I'm talking about isn't easy. It's hard, it's messy, it takes a lot of effort, and it changes everything. It gave my mom the ability to move forward and to have a blessed life. In 1982, my mom received a phone call from a young man named Roman Holler. He was that baby that was born in the woods all those years back. He wasn't a baby anymore. He's a grown man, and his son was about ready to be bar mitzvahed in Israel. And he looked all over for the world for my mom, whom he called his mom, so that she could go and be a part of that ceremony. It was an incredible thing for her. But what she found out after meeting with Roman was that it was incredible, actually. You see, what happened was when the war was over, Roman's parents, Ida and Laser Holler, they went back to their home in Germany, in Munich, actually, and they did all the passport papers and things to try and go to Israel, but it just did not go through. And so they ended up starting jobs and making a life there in Munich. But somehow they heard about what happened to the major after the war was over. You see, the major had gone back to his wife finally when the war was over, but she'd heard the fact that he'd had a young Polish housekeeper and she wanted nothing to do with him. She refused to let him back into his house. And so he went to people, friends that he'd known his whole life, but there was rumors going around about Major Rugemer. People were saying he'd become a Jew sympathizer. And there was big fear associated with that. And nobody would let this man, now in his mid-70s, into their homes. And he was literally forced to live on the streets. Somehow, Roman's parents, Nita and Laser, heard about what happened to the major, and they put baby Roman in the back seat. And they drove to that town in Germany, and they searched the streets until they found him. And then they put him in the back seat with Roman, took him home. And he ended up living with the Hollers until he passed away. And Roman grew up calling him Zadie. So there's another word that I want to add to love that's really powerful, and it's forgiveness. You put those two words together and you have power stronger than any weapon, because it has the ability to soften the hardest of hearts and open the most closed minds. In 1984, Mom was speaking to a great big audience in Los Angeles. And afterwards, there was a couple who came up right in the front row and they said, Irene, we're going to Poland soon, and we would love to try and help you find your sisters. She had mentioned in her talk that she'd never seen them again. She said, I don't think they're alive. I've tried my best. Now, Poland remained a communist country, and when my mother left Europe, she was wanted by the Germans and the Russians, so she was a bit limited. But she said, there's nobody seems to know where they are. I think they've died. Well, this couple, they went to Poland, and they were diligent. They checked with the consulates, and the embassy came up with nothing. Every local Catholic church they could find, couldn't find them at all. Nobody knew their names. Nobody knew anything about them. On the last day, in a taxi cab on the way to the airport to fly back to the States, they asked the cab driver if he could find a little corner store so they could buy some snacks for the long plane ride home. He found one and pulled over, and they got out. They got their items, went up to the shopkeeper, and they thought, let's try one more time. And they asked him, do you know these women, Janina, Maria, Bronya, Wajagut? He said, I never heard of them. But there was a woman who'd been shopping in the back of the store, and she heard what they were saying. She came running up the aisle, took the list from their hands, pointed at one of the names and said, this one is me. It was my Aunt Bronya. And this couple gave my Aunt Bronya my mom's contact information, and 10 days later, Mom got a letter. She called it a letter from heaven, a letter from all four of her sisters saying, we found you, and we love you, and we can't wait to see you. So after a very, very many decades, We were putting mom on a plane, sending her back to Poland so she could be reunited with her sisters. I loved so much when she called me the day after she got to Poland. She was, because I wanted to hear about their reunion. She got into Warsaw and then had to get in a small little commuter plane to go to the village where her sister lived. And as they were landing, mom says, I was looking out the window for my 4 beautiful sisters, and all I saw was 4 gray-haired babushkas waiting for me. I didn't realize that they were getting old too. But they were able to continue seeing each other. They were able to come to Southern California and spend time with her, so I got to meet them. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. You know, to close with, I have to tell you that one of the questions I get all the time is, you know, what did I think of this story? How did it affect my life? At 14, you know, teenagers really have a lot of important things going on in their life, boys, and I had a horse. And so my mom's story was unusual, but truly never heard the word Holocaust before. It was not something taught in the 70s in Southern California. I didn't know any Jewish people. And so I knew there was something big going on with my mom's life, but I was kind of one of those typical spoiled only children who was greatly loved. And, you know, it didn't affect me too much, I'm sorry to say. It wasn't until I was about 20, mom was already speaking, talking to groups, but there was a school in Watts, California, right in the Los Angeles area that wanted her to come out and talk to the students. I don't know if any of you remember the Watts riots that were going on, but it was just shortly after this time. Mom, of course, was more than happy to say yes, not at all afraid of anything. About a week before she was supposed to go to speak to these kids, the principal called her up and they said, Mrs. Opdyke, I need to let you know that we have had issues about your visit. There's been swastikas painted on the sidewalks. And this morning, someone has taken a can of red paint and poured it down the steps of the school. And at the bottom, they've written, Jew lovers, stay home or else. And we wanted to tell you, and we would certainly understand if you'd like to cancel. And my mother replies, I will not be intimidated by bullies. And so he said, we kind of thought you might say that. So we've lined it up for you to go to the LAPD, and an officer will drive you to school, escort you in there, take you back to your car afterwards. And mom answers, oh, honey, that will not be necessary. My daughter, she will drive me. Yay. So I take her that day. We pull into the parking lot. School is just about to start, and the students are in the parking lot coming. And I use the word students really loosely because these guys look like they were 30 years old. They were big. The different ethnic groups were very apparent and very separate, and you could feel hate in that parking lot. We get out of the car and mom, all 5 foot of her, marches across the parking lot, totally oblivious to all of this. I'm walking behind her, kind of watching my back. And when we get into the school, the principal invites mom to come into his office so he can talk to her. And he tells me to go into the gymnasium because that's where the assembly is going to be held. So I go in there, I find a seat on the bleachers kind of close to the door just in case. And the bell rings and these students start coming in. Looking at their faces, it was plainly obvious that the last place they wanted to be in the entire world was listening to some little old lady talk to them about something called the Holocaust. And as they filed in, the noise level rose so loud that you couldn't hear anything. And at one point, the principal came into the middle of the basketball court to introduce my mom, I assume because he's holding a microphone and his lips are moving. But it's so noisy in there, you can't hear him. And he does his best to try and quiet them down, but it doesn't work. And so finally, mom enters and starts walking down into the middle of the basketball court, this little tiny thing. She looked like a little cotton ball with her white fluffy hair. And she grabs the microphone and stands there and waits. Because she had this firm belief that if you waited long enough, people would give you the respect, and they would behave. And sure enough, they did quiet down. And she starts with what she said every time to kids. Good morning, my darling childrens. I am so happy to see your beautiful faces, and I want you to know that I've come here today because I love you. Sorry, I was getting teary at that part. It became so quiet in there that it'd be like if you were sitting in church. But what really blew me away was afterwards, these kids that wouldn't ever even be in the same room together unless they were forced to, were now standing in line next to each other on their knees because they were so tall and she was so tiny, so they could get a hug and a kiss. And I watched one after another leave with these bright red lipstick kisses on their cheek and scoot around and get back into line so that they could do it all over again. And that's when it hit me, the power of love. When you can stand before a perceived enemy and not see the differences, but share the things you have in common, share the love, share the respect, share the things that you do have the same. It changes lives. It changed those kids' lives, and it certainly changed mine that day. The bottom line is that's what we're here for. You know, it's all great to have wonderful careers and jobs and homes and families and stuff, but it's got to be so much more. We're made for connection. We're made to lift each other up, to help each other. When I talk to kids, the one thing I say is every day we have multiple opportunities to show kindness, to make a difference. We just have to have our eyes set so that they see them. Sometimes we have to take our eyes off ourselves and our problems and all our wants and needs and stuff and look around, because the opportunities are absolutely endless. So what you do is pretty amazing, and you do make a difference, and you know, in your group. But I just give all of us that encouragement, and ask that the first thing you do in the morning for me is I ask God, give me eyes to see hurt and pain and suffering and loneliness, because there's so many people that have that, and give us the wisdom to know how to reach that, how to help that, how to befriend somebody. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
What a beautiful story, and so powerful. And thank you, Jeannie, for having the courage to tell that story, because it must be so difficult for you, but also so uplifting. We have a few questions. I think most people were riveted, so the chat wasn't as active as we typically have it. But one of the questions was, how many of the 12 people actually survived the war?
All 12 of them, including the baby. So we, the movie, if any of you saw the movie, it was a Broadway play in 2003. And while we were on, while it was being played, it was called Irene's Veil. We had several of the grandkids of some of the survivors be able to come to Manhattan and bring them up on stage. And but they all did survive, absolutely.
And was she able to reconnect with all of them the way that she did with Roman?
No, no, when she came to the United States, she truly knew that she had issues with trying to get into Germany or Russia, because she was a wanted person. And so she was very, very limited and really had no way to know where they went. You know, everybody scattered. So trying to find people was hard. So she did eventually get reconnected with one Fanke Zilberman, who was a younger woman that was my mom's age, on the Jerry Springer show. That's a long story, but yeah.
I think I would have liked to see that episode of the
Oh,
Jerry
it was
Springer
funny.
Show.
Yes. When she first called me to tell me about it, I was already living in the Pacific Northwest, and we had our weekly calls, and she says, I'm going to be on television. I'm like, wow, cool, Mom, what show? I hear all this rifling of papers. I'm like, you'd think you would know what show you're going to be on. You're going to be on TV. That's a pretty big deal. So finally she finds it. Let's go. I'm going to be on the Mr. Jerry Springer show. It's like, Mom, no, he's a very nice man. So it was a really good show, actually, but it freaked me out. So
That is very funny. And then a question was, how was she able to get the food for them during the time they were hidden in the villa?
Good question. She was in the perfect position. She was hired to be a housekeeper for this major, and his main goal for having this big villa was entertaining. So a typical man, I suppose, especially during that era, is clueless to how much food you need to have. So, their house was well stocked, and she had endless ability to purchase whatever she wanted. So that was not a problem at all.
And then I want to share a few comments that have come up in the chat. Your mother was amazing. What a brave woman to have endured all that pain and suffering and helping Jewish people, putting her life at risk. It's really, truly amazing. Again, what an amazing story. They've seen the play and heard Irene's daughter before, but it was still very riveting. We need more Irenas in the world. Thank you for hosting. How long did she hide the Jews in the villa?
Just about 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and it doesn't show that in the movie, but it was a fairly long time.
And then this question is for you, Jeannie. Love is your theme for the talk today. How has love guided you in telling your mom's story? Because it must be incredibly painful and difficult for you as well.
It was mostly because I'm very much an introvert, and in fourth grade, I had to do a book report in front of the class. And when I stood up there, I was so nervous that my whole lunch came out in front of everybody. And I was mortified and promised I would never do that again. But when Mom passed away, she had 11 speaking engagements lined up at 85. And so I called them to cancel, and one was only 2 weeks away. And they just pleaded with me to come and tell her story. And I said, I absolutely can't, and hung up the phone. And then guilt, guilt. It's like, oh my goodness, my mom does all this stuff. I can't do this one thing. And called them back and said, what do I have to do? And they said they would make a panel for me, and I could be one of many. And that's just kind of how I started. And it started as a have to, and now it's an absolute passion. Because the truth is, we really have not moved ahead too much as far as really laying our life down for somebody or caring. We have progressed in so many areas, but history keeps repeating itself. And, to me, the only way that it is going to change is us as an individual, not the government, not the police, not our elected officials. We as people, have to see other people as valuable and, kick in, just be there for each other, and really make that matter a priority. We have so much going on, and I get that it's nice to come home and just have quiet and peace, but for our world to be better, we have to connect. And the boundaries, the issues of color and race and stuff, it's gotten crazy. They're people, and love knows no boundaries, or borders.
And then there's a question about your mother and Righteous Among Nations. Can you tell us about that? And can you tell us about her visit to Israel?
Yes, I unfortunately didn't get to go with that, but Roman met her there in Israel, and some of her Jewish friends in Los Angeles got to go, and it was a real high point for her, and yeah, just to be able to stand there with a baby that was born from that time was pretty incredible. So.
In today's world, we know that we're seeing a rampant rise in anti-Semitism that's been amplified by the October 7th events. Your mom obviously is not alive today, but what do you think, how would she respond to today's world and the rise in anti-Semitism that we see so rampant
Yeah,
here in the United States and globally?
yeah. Well, I don't think she would respond any different than she did back when she was a teenager. Those messages of hate and separation can't be tolerated at all. And as a Christian, my mother was, I'm a Christian too. Judaism is the root of our faith, and I don't want to get into that, but we stand with Israel. We stand with everything that you're about. So yeah, it's a political hotbed, and as this movie has been going around the country, and I've gone to a lot of the premieres, especially the ones in college campuses, um, there is a very strong, especially with the youth on college campuses, anti-Israel stance, and it just breaks my heart. So I don't know where it stems from, and I don't know how things have slipped, but we can't stop. We just can't. And loving people also is telling the truth, and we cannot let lies like that spread. So yeah, it's a one at a time thing, and it starts at the home. With kids, it's amazing how many kids can get brainwashed that are very intelligent in so many other ways. But yeah, it may start with the teachers and professors too, but I'm not going to get into that.
And then looking at it from an educational lens, what do you think about the current trend to ban books and silence difficult histories? Your mom was so brave. You are so brave, sharing your story, sharing this difficult history. What do you think about this current trend to silence those voices?
It's absolutely ridiculous. You can't, even in nature, it shows you can't help a chick inside of an egg break through. You can't help a butterfly come out of a cocoon. It is the hard things that you have to go through that make you learn, that make you grow, and history repeats itself. So goodness, I mean, let's wipe out all history classes. It's just, that's the kind of thinking. How can you not repeat things if you haven't learned for what's happened? It doesn't make sense. I didn't, yeah. So it, I don't know. I just don't even know how that thinking came. I get that it's offensive for people to say that, gosh, these things happened to my people, but the Jewish people could say that too. You had horrible things, and you have a right to say we were promised never again, and it's just, we have to learn. And learning from like the Holocaust is that we can't sit back and do nothing. We have to take a stand. We have to speak out. It's not going to go away. So,
And this is a personal question. If it's uncomfortable for you to answer this, just let me know. But you were 14 when you found out about your mother's story. That's the teenage years, the time period where they're starting to get some angst in the home. Did your relationship with your mother change once you understood her life?
not soon enough. I wished it did. I was so involved I had horses growing up, and they consumed my time, and then school and boys, and I got married way too young. So it really wasn't until I was more grown up with kids of my own that I really could see the quality of person she was and the sacrifices that she made. So yeah, I if I could ever have a redo, I would have been a different kid, less spoiled. I was greatly loved, and I was so secure in that, but it really was kind of all about me. So
Well, from your voice today and your sharing her story, I know she would be incredibly proud of you and the ability for you to share so freely this story and to spread the message of love and forgiveness and the importance of opening one's heart to the truth about today's world and reaching out to your neighbor and protecting your neighbor. It's really an important piece of the story. I
thanks.
do have one piece before I close. One of our participants is an Israeli Christian and has two sons, fighting in Gaza. And she is especially touched by your message of love, and she wants us to thank you. So.
Wow, that's, yes. That I can't even imagine where she's at, but I appreciate that so much. Yeah, yeah. It, you know, we've, my husband and I have done foster care, so we've had 60 kids in our house, not all traditional foster kids, but 60 youths in the house, and it, yeah, they're all kind of grown up, and even when they're in having problems or something, I know how I worry, and so I can't imagine you having your own children in such kind of peril, but I'll keep you in my prayers.
Thank you. Another participant is saying, you are so articulate, and they're wondering if you have a career of your own helping with difficult issues and solving these difficult issues in the world.
Well, I tell my mom's story. It went from running a horse stable and having a house full of teenagers to about 250 flights and talks a year. So it keeps me very, very busy. And I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of people. I wish it's like speaking to the choir, because the people who come to listen are people who are interested and have a heart for it. But I do get into a lot of schools and have some ability to talk to people, but hopefully it's more of a multiplying effect if somebody can be inspired. And I have gotten great letters from kids who say, you know what, me and my friends have made it a pact that at lunchtime we're going to look for the kids that sit by themselves and we're going to befriend them, or something like that. And those are so encouraging. So I think just being able to multiply that positive message, because we get a lot of negative messages, so we need it to be overbalanced the other way.
Thank you. And finally, so many questions. How can people who haven't seen the film see the film?
I wish I was in charge of it so I knew how all this worked. There's a few more film festivals, and what I hear is that there's going to be about right now 800 theaters across the United States that are going to see the movie for 2 days in a row. And then if there's enough interest, theaters will continue to have it play longer. And if not, it's going to go into like Netflix and Amazon and things like that. So we'll see. Yeah, I don't really understand the entertainment business, but we'll see. I just put it all in God's hands and see how it works out.
And a few people didn't know the name of the film. The film is called Irene's Vow. So
yes, Irene's vow. It's from that vow where she said, she finally gave up and said, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes. So yeah. My mom said, I've been with her where people say, don't you, if you didn't do what you did, you wouldn't have suffered so much and stuff. And she said, had she not made the decision, she might have lived. She ended up living anyway, but she said to live with regret, knowing you could have done something and didn't. She said that there would be no life at all for her, knowing that she'd missed those opportunities. So, yeah.
All right, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your mother's story and opening your heart, and this incredible presentation. Gratitude for continuing your mother's work. Classrooms Without Borders is forever in your debt for sharing this with us, and we do hope that the film becomes more widely available to greater audiences once it finishes up on that film festival circuit. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We so appreciate all of you, all of your questions, all of your comments in the chat. We hope that you will join us for more events in 2024. We have next week, our post-film discussion is being held on Thursday at 3 p.m. It will feature the director, and in a conversation with Michael Berenbaum. The film is entitled Resistance, They Fought Back. So please find this registration as well as our other upcoming events on our website at www.cwbpgh.org. Thank you, and we'll see you all again soon.